Hey everyone, I'm Tamara Baeva, and I just started working at Cox Edge. Since I'm brand new, I'm just on week 4 right now, and I'm still learning the ropes. I really jumped at the opportunity to host this and get a chance to talk to Naren Muthia, the chief strategist here at Cox Edge. This is going to be the first of a series of webinars that we're hosting in 2022. It's the first of about 12, actually. And to kick off the new year, we're going to be having a conversation with Naren and asking him some tough questions. He's had a chance to look at most of the questions, and now we're going to press him for some answers. After that, we're also going to ask any questions you might have. So if there's something about edge computing, edge cloud, or anything else you hear over the next 20 minutes or so, feel free to go ahead and drop that right into the chat, and we'll get to it at the end. Naren, before we get started, can you tell us a little bit more about what we mean when we say, edge computing, right? What's really the scope we're talking about here?
Sure. So nice to have you, Tamara, and welcome on board.
Thank
And
you.
Happy New Year to our audience as well as we kind of kick the year off with this session. And yeah, happy to be here and share any learnings that we've developed over the course of the last year, and kind of looking into this year as well. So yes, I mean, for the context of this webinar, right, as we kind of think about edge, it's really kind of focused on a network edge or a service provider edge, right? We're not implying anything on-prem or or any other type of data center that's people might call edge. So it's really focused on the last mile service provider edge, just to provide more context.
Great. Thank you for setting the stage.
Sure.
So now I want to ask something that's been a really popular question, and it's been top of mind for me too. What's your outlook for edge and edge computing in 2022? Is this the year that you think edge adoption is really going to take off?
Sure. I mean, the last couple of years, right, we've seen this gradual momentum, shift towards edge, and it's really about moving, workloads from a centralized cloud, to having compute and storage, right, really either on-prem or near-prem in an edge data center. And the reason why being on-prem is, really you didn't have much other options available, right? So a lot of the POCs or pilots, where that require low latency, were deployed really in an on-prem type of instance. Now there's this couple of estimates that are out this year, that are expecting edge spending to increase about another 15% from last year, which is sizable. Um, the one thing to kind of keep in mind when everyone talks about edge, right? I mean, there isn't really a killer use case, right, that everyone is jumping on. But there are use cases that generate tangible business value, from an edge deployment. And we're starting to see increased number of these use cases across various different segments, like in terms of various different verticals. So again, going back to the fact that there weren't a lot of options available from accessing an edge infrastructure until recently, right? A lot of the deployments have been on-prem, but now with more options starting to come online, you're going to see the shift from on-prem to near-prem or a service provider edge.
Oh, that's really interesting. Speaking of shifts, right, one of the things that's impacting all of us is we're in year 2 of this awful global pandemic. And one of the big implications has been just this hybrid work model. Since I've started, I haven't even been into the office. Everything's been virtual. I haven't met anyone in person, right? So as we think about some of those shifts, what role do you foresee edge playing when we're thinking about the future of IT infrastructure?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the pandemic now seems like permanent, right? We've kind of going on
Gosh.
the third year, and it's really shifted how and where we do our work. To your point, but organizations have had to quickly adapt to this new normal, right? And you're seeing this kind of shift from a hub and spoke model to more of a mesh environment where applications can reside anywhere from an edge to all the way to a centralized cloud, and users are located anywhere as well and will still need to access these applications, and you still have to maintain consistency around performance of these applications and also security across these various environments, right? I mean, So this is a complex challenge. It's not straightforward, and the centralized cloud wasn't really designed to address this. So
Mhm.
that's where you're seeing some of these breaking points, and where edge. I mean, edge is really complementary to the centralized cloud, right? So I
Mhm.
think this is where applications can be architected more effectively to manage some of these complexities. And another small data point that I want to share is, IDC released a data point saying that 50% of new enterprise IT infrastructure will be deployed at the edge rather than a traditional data center, right? And that's
Wow.
really going to be up from 10% from back in like 2019, 2020. So just in
Mm.
this quick span of like a couple of years, you're seeing this big, shift from an enterprise IT infrastructure standpoint. So
Yeah, that's a really big number, 50%. That's a huge shift. I also think that when people consider the cloud, right, they start to think about some of the outages that happened last year. And because of that, a lot more people are learning about edge. So, what are we thinking about the ways that edge computing can really help mitigate some of those risks that enterprises, developers, and even some of the consumers felt towards the end of the year around that holiday season?
yes, I mean, everyone's got a cell phone, and
Mhm.
everyone's just shopping online, shopping over the phone. I mean, there's just so much going on, right? And access to information is readily available, and people
Yeah.
need that access as well. So that creates a lot of challenges on the back end, and obviously that's kind of what would happen in terms of some of the outages. But really one of the key concepts around edge is like resiliency, right? So
Mhm.
instead of having a few big data centers and a couple of availability zones, what the edge cloud providers might have is like hundreds of these regional data centers across multiple regions and markets. So the idea, is that by distributing and decentralizing this cloud infrastructure, such that if your local data center goes offline, the next
Mhm.
nearest one, which might be in the same region or city, might pick it up, or might take over. So that sort of like failover mechanism, works by supporting workloads in the next nearest edge location, right? So, I mean,
Mhm.
outages can occur and they'll always be part of the cloud, but edge cloud is architected such that, it can deliver maximum uptime and
Mhm.
reliable service, right? Due to kind of the decentralized nature. And also, what you will start seeing going forward is that edge will be seen as a very compelling redundancy option, right, for
Mhm.
services running in a centralized cloud, and even like more so when you kind of think about critical applications that are hosted in a cloud. Edge will become a more common area to consider to improve reliability.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like edge can really bring a lot of value, especially with what you're saying around resiliency. What do you think are some of the benefits that edge computing can bring when we start thinking about early stage developers and startups, things like that?
Yeah, it's a great question because like a lot of until now, a lot of what's been happening with Edge, right? I talked about the POCs or pilots, right? It's been primarily around a lot of these large enterprises kind of
Yeah.
driving the need for that, and more on-prem type of deployments, right? But now, with more edge infrastructure starting to become mainstream and available, now you kind of need to start thinking about how does the applications of the future and the developers take advantage of that edge infrastructure, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean, developers really have several choices, right, when it comes to
Mhm.
running and deploying their workloads. I mean, it can be in a public cloud, it could be in an edge cloud, it could be on-prem, it could be on the device itself. So, I mean, there's lots of options. But as a developer kind of building the application for the future, you're also kind of looking to avoid cloud lock-ins, right? Because you want the
Mhm.
application to run in various different clouds and not just one particular provider. And you also need the right set of tools to be able to create these applications that can be run in like multiple cloud environments. So there's a lot that's behind the scenes that need to be enabled for developers to kind of think about first the
Mhm.
infrastructure needs to be available, then B, the right set of tools to enable the developer, right? So when you think about applications that require
Mhm.
low latency, that need to support real-time data streams, right, and reduce the amount of data that's being transported to a central cloud, edge really becomes a compelling option. And like I said, until
Mhm.
recently, developers didn't have access to an edge having a broad set of capabilities, right? It wasn't really available. And at Cox Edge, I mean, we've really made it easy and simple for anyone to access a low latency infrastructure at a location of their choice, based on service availability, just through a simple credit card transaction. I mean,
Mm,
it's impossible to be able to access an edge infrastructure through a credit card transaction today. So I think
yeah.
the idea is there to, by reducing friction, to really enable, the developer community to kind of think about building applications and where edge can really add value to what they're essentially building.
That's
Um,
really
so,
cool.
so that's just one aspect of it, right? But also on the flip side, applications are continuously starting to become more distributed in nature, right? And rolling these distributed applications on a traditional cloud means deploying and managing, like a dozen tools, right? Which
Mhm.
also become very complex. So if you're really building these applications for the future more than
Mhm.
ever, you should really start thinking about how to leverage the edge. And it's easy to get started. I mean, edge providers are offering like programs that are designed for startups, just like the ones that are offered by cloud providers, right? That includes free credits, technical resources, and technical support.
Wow. I had no idea it was so easy to get started. That sounds like it would be really great just to get in there and start experimenting. Very cool. I have a more personal question.
Sure.
I'm really interested. We've been hearing a lot about, AR, VR, and the metaverse. And my friends are really big gamers. They're consumers of AR, VR. Some of them have bought some of those devices. When we think about that, what should we really expect to see in the near future?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's really not clear today, right? What the
Yeah.
metaverse of the future is going to look like. But one thing is certain, right? I mean, AR and VR will be integral technologies to kind of build the metaverse, right? Kind of these 3D world, kind of where we exist and
Mhm.
enable these social interactions, right? So, with the largest enterprises of the world really kind of committing to this investment in this future, you'll start seeing a lot of adoption in the ARVR space in the future. And when you kind of think about
Mhm.
ARVR, I mean, until this point, right, a lot of um, the effort that's been focused on there has been more commercial, right, and
Mhm.
that's been to kind of generate any type of like business value, whether it's real estate or industrial applications. I
Mhm.
mean, a lot of the focus has been to how are you, and even like it's really about adding more efficiency to existing operations, which generates business value. But with the investments in metaverse,
Mhm.
it'll really enable more consumer adoption and it'll also enable more consumer applications. So I think that's the shift that you'll start seeing, with that. And again, this is purely from a business lens, right?
Mhm.
From a technology feasibility standpoint, I mean, the slow adoption has primarily been because of the limitations around onboard processing,
Mhm.
as well as the need to kind of get low latency low enough so the user experience is great, right? Which is very important. So what edge computing really does is it really offloads a lot of that processing, to render images remotely, and as well as the latency edge provides, offers this really delivers on this enhanced user experience. So those are all some of the benefits, and also if you kind of think about not having the need to deploying these servers, in each user site, you can really readily scale these applications as well. So I think there's a lot of benefits what Edge brings here, and as the adoption increases, I mean Edge will have a more important aspect to play as a supporting technology.
Very interesting. Some of these things that seem so futuristic are, near term now. It's not just sci-fi anymore. Thinking a little bit more about the future and the future of telco, how do you think that strategy is evolving? Is the future going to be multi-cloud?
Yeah, that's again. There's telcos or communication service providers, right? CSPs. They're very important stakeholders in this evolution to the edge. every operator's like edge strategy, right? It's going to be shaped on their existing capabilities, capabilities that they can develop, as well as the partnerships that they can forge.
Mm.
I mean, partnerships with cloud providers are important aspect of how CSPs deliver value at the edge, right? You've already seen these announcements, both locally and globally. CSPs partnering with
Mhm.
hyperscalers, multiple cloud providers, right? Again, it really depends on what type of strength each of them bring, whether it's ISVs or enterprise focus. So you'll start seeing more of that happen, and hence, multi-cloud will start playing a more prominent role, right? But I mean, with all of
Mhm.
these things, still comes complexity around managing, your applications across multiple clouds, which would need to get addressed as well. But again, all of
Mhm.
this stems from the fact that enterprises, have a growing preference not to be locked in with one cloud provider, right? And hence you're starting to see telcos as a service provider establish these partnerships with multiple vendors, and then but it's really ultimately it boils down to the applications and the use cases, and that will really determine if a public hybrid or an edge cloud is really preferred, right? So it
Mhm.
again, there's not like a one kind of a one solution for everything. It's really going to boil down to really considering what the requirements are, and the options available, and then kind of architecting something that's going to be beneficial to each of those use cases.
Okay, thanks, Naran. Um, when we think about Cox Edge, is there any specific focus on an area or any industry when we're thinking about 2022?
Yeah, sure. Again, it's been 6 months since we
Mhm.
launched Cox Edge, right? I mean, there's been lots of learnings and great customer conversations. We've had lots of interest, customer interest across various segments. I mean, the areas that I kind of want to,
Mhm.
maybe highlight are, what, at least from what we've been kind of seeing, right? The opportunity really is in the media and entertainment
Mm.
space around, delivering content, right? And with again, so much content that's being available today, and readily available today, the user experience is very front and center. So I think there's a lot of there's opportunities there that we're in discussions with. And then another segment that I see near-term opportunity is really in the retail space,
Mm.
where store efficiency, throughput, and then customer experience really both, in store as well as omni-channel are really driving some of the needs for, edge and some of the technology transformation that you're seeing in that space. And then a last area that I might want to add is also like financial services, right? We're kind of exploring and developing learnings in that space as well, and understanding, the use case that are more coming out in the forefront, based on limitations around existing infrastructure to support some of these transformations that these organizations are kind of going through. So I think really, I mean, those
Mhm.
are kind of the areas where we're kind of focused on in 2022. And again, there's edge really applies across a lot of different segments, but you need to be able to focus on particular areas where we see there's business value
Mhm.
that can be generated in the near term. So yeah.
Cool. It'll be really interesting to see how some of these start to play out in the experiences that we see day to day, too.
Yep.
Very interesting. So, is it fair to say then that the first generation of cloud came from software oriented companies, and then the next generation of cloud is coming from infrastructure companies like, telcos and cable companies? And how do you think that'll affect edge cloud in the future?
uh, that's kind of an interesting way to phrase that, right? I mean, yes,
Mhm.
the when you really kind of think about the edge, and the distributed nature of it, right? It's really not just the cloud anymore. It's really about kind of the coming together of networks and cloud, right? So you really need to
Mhm.
have this integration of network and cloud for edge to be pervasive. And so but if you kind of think about networks and infrastructure, it's really the communication service providers or the telcos that have been kind of the forefront of it, right? For even hundreds of years. So what's going to be different from the traditional cloud and the edge is that there are going to be many stakeholders, right? both from the infrastructure standpoint and the network standpoint, that'll start being able to deliver services, cloud services. And then on the traditional cloud providers now are going to be partnering with those network and telco providers to have, to be able to provide those cloud services closer to the user. Because again, we touched on this earlier, right? Just having that
Mhm.
hub and spoke model isn't going to work anymore.
Yeah.
And so I think this shift, and you'll start seeing a lot of different stakeholders play in this, and there's opportunity for everyone to play and participate and capture and deliver value here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Naran. This has been selfishly very useful to me as I'm learning the ropes, learning more about Cloud Edge at Cox Edge. We do have a few questions from the audience.
Sure.
So, love for you to answer that. First up, when people talk about edge, latency is usually kind of the key word that they think about. What are some things outside of latency that people don't pay enough attention to?
Yeah, sure. I mean, latency and edge always seem kind of synonymous, right? Everyone thinks about latency, when you talk about edge, but really there's a lot more what edge really offers, right? So,
Mhm.
kind of the distributed nature of edge. We talked about it earlier around the outages. So the resiliency, the reliability, what an edge architecture offers applications is pretty compelling. Um, and then when you also think about applications where applications, it, it, by default generate data, right? And as applications start generating lots of data, and enterprises start generating a lot of data, I mean, moving all this data to a centralized cloud to process and then provide insights, I mean, isn't necessarily very efficient, right?
Mhm.
And especially if you need insights quicker. So it also increases those transport costs over time. So that's kind of where edge really adds value in being able to process data locally or within the same region, right? So you kind of mitigate some of that cost. So I think these are some of the areas where edge can really add value, from a resiliency standpoint, from a cost standpoint as well.
Hey, it always helps to save some money.
Hmm.
Great. We have another question that came in. As Edge becomes more popular and easier to get, how will that affect what companies will keep on-prem in their own local or hybrid clouds or other locations?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this goes back to a couple of things that we touched on already with more of this hybrid workforce,
Mm.
which is kind of here to stay,
Yeah.
and the whole hub and spoke model, right? So, with applications being potentially distributed in the future, right, and the big need for that, the infrastructure needs to be distributed as well to support it and to enable it, so that the traditional on-prem thing doesn't necessarily, help anymore. But having said that, a lot of the reasons why on-prem existed was, because you needed a certain level of performance. There were data sovereignty issues and other type of like security, compliance reasons why that needed exist, right? So now, on-prem is not going to go away completely, but I think you're going to start seeing a lot more of that shift more to either cloud or edge, based on the balance between performance and scale that you need, right? For enterprises of the future to be truly distributed. So I think that's kind of what you're going to start seeing is this shift from on-prem to more of edge locations to handle the performance, and then more to a cloud to get the scale that you need, versus having to manage these resources on-prem.
Great. We have another question here. Is there a killer app for Edge yet? And if there isn't, what do you think might be a likely candidate for an Edge killer app?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of subjective, right? But
Mhm.
at least from what we're starting to see is, you know, one of the real values of Edge is, the latency is great, but it's really about being able to process data locally and have those insights available, right? So I think AI and ML are, workloads are starting to become more prominent, because now,
Mhm.
again, data is great, but the insights what the data generates is going to be useful. It's going to be great, as well as competitive edge for companies, right? So, and this applies across various industries. So when you think about use cases, and kind of the nature behind it, having these insights that AI and ML type of applications can support, and how Edge can kind of enable that, and the applicability of this across various different use cases and verticals is going to be pretty compelling. So I think that's kind of where you're going to start
Yeah,
seeing more of how Edge is going to get incorporated into how enterprises think about application infrastructure, etc.
got it. Okay. Um, we've got a few more minutes, so hopefully we can get to a couple more questions here. The next one is, will Cox be deploying any micro edge data centers?
And can you kind of define what you mean by micro edge data center? Because I just want to make sure we're talking about the same things here.
I don't see a detail here from the
Sure.
person who sent it out.
I mean, I can. I mean, if micro edge kind of means like more, deploying. Like for example, Cox Edge, right? Today we deploy everything out of like regional data centers, and we have hundreds of these regional data centers across various different markets where Cox operates today, right? So, and these regional data centers are all the way from tier one through tier three. And by micro data centers, if this is really just a closet somewhere, like a single rack closet, I mean, there isn't a need for that today, right? I mean, the whole idea of like wanting to
Mhm.
kind of move to the far edge is really boils down to the latency, right? And if we can deliver like sub 10 millisecond, sub 15 millisecond type of latency, it should really support most of these applications that kind of exist today. So there isn't really a business case or justification to go to these micro data centers, but the
Mm,
point is, as long as we're pervasive and the availability is there, right? I mean, we can really support any applications that require that type of performance.
great, thank you. I know we have quite a few more questions that we didn't have time to get to, but we'll send out a follow-up email with some of that. And then, Naren, if you can talk a little bit about what's next.
What's next? I mean, there's lots of things going on, right? I mean,
Mhm.
like I said, Edge is starting to become more more talked about, and so it's creating a lot of excitement, activity in the market. So for us, it's really about right expanding into rest of our markets this year, as we set out to do. Expanding more of our services, and especially bringing in some of the tools to really enable the developer community to kind of support that application development of the future, right? So yeah, there's no short of things to do, but 2022 is seems to be a pretty exciting year for Cox Edge, and we are excited for the ride as well.
Awesome. So thank you so much. Everyone, check out, you can set up free developer accounts that have some included workloads. We've got the link up here. We'll share it later. And we've also got a brand new program with some free usage credits for entrepreneurs and founders. So really easy to get started. And thank you again so much, Naran, for your time today and for talking us through your predictions for the future.
Sure. No, thanks for having me, and hopefully this was educational, and we can do some more of these in the future. So yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for joining and have a great rest of your day.